let's continue our look at the early years of new South African democracy. In this video, we'll take a look at 5.6, how did the government respond to domestic crises? So let's look at how they can respond to some of the major problems and violence of their early years, especially this guy. Before 1994, political extremism and violence, it was very common in South African politics. We've seen this in the apartheid era with a lot of violence. But after 1994, political extremism does calm down a bit. It's not as bad because a lot of that extremism was pretty much resolved in many ways. And here's how they resolved it. After 1994, they include the Inkatha in the government, so the Zulu have a place in their new government. And this decreases violence between the ANC and the Zulu Inkatha supporters. So this ends a little bit the ethnic violence between the Xhosa and the Zulu. Former guerrilla fighters, like the ANC, MK, as well as the APLA. So these former fighters are integrated into the national army. And so it becomes a more diverse army, and former guerrilla fighters that would have been committing acts of political violence are now working for the government. And so 27,000 MK operatives, 6,000 APLA fighters are added into the military for a more mixed military. There's some tension. There's got to be new tension when these different armies all of a sudden unite. They used to be enemies, and now they are one army. And so there's definitely tension, but they're not going around and killing each other. And then there's this guy. The Afrikaner right wing committed a few violent acts because they were not happy with these changes. But overall, they are very much weakened after 1994. The AWB was demoralized after their failed invasion of Bafo-Sowana. I'm sure I mispronounced that. And so they attempted several committed acts of violence during the negotiations, but when those failed, they start to weaken. The AWB leader, Eugene Terry Leblanche, was given a 6-year jail sentence for assault and attempted murder. And as of 2010, he was murdered, and there's some controversy between as far as that trial, because he was murdered by some of the workers on his own farm. And it's debatable whether for the reasons of why he was murdered. But he was kind of the main leader, and so we haven't had somebody of his level, of his caliber, rise up for the right wing. Another smaller group is the Die Boeremag, Boer Force or Boer Power, emerged as an alternative to the AWB with the goal to create an independent Afrikaner state. They want to set up their own Boer country. And so they had bombings, they targeted black civilians, they would steal a lot of their weapons from army bases, like rifles, like grenade launchers, things like that. However, most of their members were caught and given long prison sentences, and so they start to weaken quite a bit. And so in most of these cases, once you take out the leader, it falls apart. A couple other groups that on occasion get a little violent. Pagad, People Against Gangsterism and Drugs. This was a vigilante group, so they meant well, because they wanted to get rid of a lot of the gangs rising up around Cape Town, around the townships. And so the goal is getting rid of gangs. But over time, this became a mostly Muslim group, and it became increasingly political and anti-Western. So it started to be more extreme as far as what their standard was. So they start off going against gangsters and drugs, but then they get a bit bigger and start to go over anything that they see is not up to their moral standard. So it started with nice intentions, but it goes too far. And we get this urban terror campaign later on, between 98 and 2002, where they target gang leaders. That was the original goal. Then they start to go after the government. They target police stations. They target Jewish synagogues. They target gay nightclubs, tourist attractions, and even Western restaurants. And so it starts as a vigilante group, which is no good. They're skipping the police force, skipping the law, and killing gangsters on their own. But they take a hard turn against the West and becomes this kind of a extremist Muslim group. Who were they after? These are the gangs, and the gangs get worse under this new government. High levels of violent crime in this new era. It's not politically motivated, as they're not standing up against the government, but it's connected to the violence and extremism of the 80s and the apartheid years because of really easy access to the weapons. So the easy access that the MK got, all those weapons that the MK was using in the past, those AK-47s, are readily available. So with all these guns everywhere, and people desperate, and a very bad history with the police, you're going to get gangsterism. Little respect for the police, and a big pile of weapons, you're going to have some problems. And so groups that once were targeting political opponents, now they're turning to crime. In a lot of cases, these are former heroes of the liberation movement. But these former heroes, they didn't have the education because of the Bantustan system. They didn't have the skills to get new jobs, and they weren't able to really work their way into the government. And so these former MK fighters, they turned to becoming gangsters to kind of maintain that high-level status and respect in their community by doing horrible things. Plus, the criminal justice system's not great. Between 94 and 96, 1/3 of their top prosecutors, the guys that are going to go after criminals, they resign. And so the government's much weakened is to go after these criminals. And the criminals have piles of guns, so it's going to lead to some major problems. It has some of the highest rates of murder, robbery, rape, assault, and car hijackings in the world. After 94, we get issues of xenophobia, and so South Africa is seen as this new place for hope. And so you get a lot of immigration from the surrounding countries. As other African nations deal with their crises, they see hope in South Africa, and so they move there. It offers peace and democracy to millions displaced in civil wars in Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in Somalia. And it offers economic opportunity for immigrants from poor nations like Mozambique, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. It's estimated you get between 3 to 8 million refugees, although South Africa only admits to 1 million. Most are moving into the townships where the situation's already terrible. Unemployment's already high, there's not enough houses, and it's making a bad situation worse. So we start to see refugee camps such as this popping up on the edges of townships. And the locals are not too happy, and we get violent actions against these new immigrants. They are blamed for the increased unemployment and the rising crime levels. The unemployment I can understand, but not necessarily the crime levels. The citizens called for increased border security and the complete deportation of these immigrants. And they even go so far as to believe that these immigrants they do not deserve basic rights, like freedom of speech and movement. They don't deserve police protection. They don't deserve access to government services. And so it gets violent on occasion as these locals are frustrated when they're not seeing jobs, they're not seeing opportunity for themselves, and they see immigrants coming in and making the situation a lot harder. And so they attack, instead of attacking the government or pushing the government to solve the problem, they blame the immigrants and attack them instead. And so shops and homes of refugees are looted and burnt, people are attacked and killed. And so the South African government reacts, but it doesn't react very well. They said that the Human Rights Commission identifies xenophobia as a serious problem, as a threat to their democracy and human rights. And so they launched this big rollback xenophobia campaign, and it increases awareness, saying, hey, don't be racist, but it doesn't do much to stop the actual attacks. It's not solving the problem of unemployment. It's just trying to solve the problem of racism by putting up signs, so good luck with that. The government attempts to limit the number of refugees, or it offers them security to kind of make sure that they're safe, but it's not solving the root problems. And so the new government, it uses existing police structures to limit the opportunities of immigrants or to kick them out, but it doesn't do a great job on solving the problem. We'll stop there.